So here today, to talk about culture change, I thought the best use of my time and my best use to you was to talk about two main versions or two main thoughts about culture change. One is that organisation level culture change, and to sort of share that with you, I'll talk about my own organisation in Australia and a bit of the journey we've been through and are continuing to go through and learn every day. And the next is about you and me and any individual who works in any capacity with older people in a long-term care setting. So this is just a lovely picture I thought I'd put up there while I'm talking, so you don't have to. That's actually taken by Kathy Greenblatt at one of our homes on the Gold Coast that L Power has visited a couple of times. It's a fantastic site. I'm going to show a little bit more of it today because it's really sunny. It's always sunny there. And it's interesting to see everyone's got a balcony. It's just a lovely thing to show when people are in the snow. But this is Arcare's journey. We started back in mid-2012, and we had pretty much the same experiences as Schlegel. We realised that we were very much stuck in a way of doing things and being, and we wanted to do better. So we thought, let's involve all of our stakeholders, family, staff, residents, volunteers, in conversations about what brings you joy, what makes life worth living in, working in, and visiting our long-term care homes. So we held focus groups in all of the states that we have homes in, and we had separate ones for family, residents, volunteers, and staff. And basically we asked them to tell us what makes life worth living here and working here. And we held these focus groups and we gathered all of these amazing stories, and we found that even though people's stories were really unique to them, we could group them into kind of 4 main themes. So then we wrote a report about those themes, sent them back out to everyone who'd participated, and then held working groups. We held 4 working groups, one for each of the themes, and they were full-day workshops in a room not unlike this, but a mixture of residents, staff, families, volunteers. And we spent the whole day looking at one of those themes and saying, how can we have more of this? How can we build on this? And much of what Arcare is today came out of those working groups, including someone saying, well, you don't really have any values statements. Back then we had a big mission statement for our company saying something like, Arcare, we believe in well-being in our communities, which is really lovely, but nobody really knew what it meant. And it didn't really tell us how to treat each other or how do we know when well-being is actually happening. So then we had a big values day. Okay, let's use these 4 themes of people's stories, not just residents, everyone who works and lives and visits under that space. Everybody. Let's take those 4 themes and start coming up with 4 values that really, really match what the people who live, work and visit there value. So we held it at we hired out a whole big dance sort of ballroom at one of our big hotels in town, and we flew people in. We had tables. It was really a similar setup, except it was even bigger and even more people. And we listened to people's stories. We spent 11 hours that day coming up with our values, because we wordsmithed them on the day too. That's why they're kind of wordy. There's a few grammar errors, but everybody had to be heard, and they're kind of living value statements, so we may relook at them, but everybody left there that day happy with them. We got through the first 3, and as you can imagine, people's stories were so much about their relationships with one another that was sort of the first thing that came to the fore. And we worked our way through the values, and they were kind of serious, and they were about partnerships and people's uniqueness, and we worked through that, and about 8 hours in we were trying to come up with our 4th value. And we come up with this gorgeous, serious stuff, but there was also another whole element that was about fun and like people's stories that were about you only in aged care, you know, and kind of irreverent stuff too. And we kind of wanted to capture that, but we were getting a bit tired by then. We had buses ready to take residents home because it was such a long day. Not one went home. We had, you know, a guy falling asleep, and I said, oh, you've done so fantastically. We've got a bus and staff to take you home. And I remember him saying, nope, just resting my eyes. There's that real camaraderie and sense that, no, we're going to get through this. But about 8 hours in, we couldn't come up with a concept or a word to describe this fourth area that was kind of this fun life, day-to-day stuff. And we were really struggling because we'd gone through all the material. We'd looked at the stories, we'd looked at all the films, and we're going, what next? So we said, right, let's talk to Joan. Her name's Joan. She's in her 90s. She was one of the residents that came there. We said, Joan, can you stand up and just remind us again, let's start afresh. Tell us what makes life worth living at Arcare. And she's in her 90s, and she sort of stood up with her walker there, and we gave her the handheld mic. And she stood up, and we're all a bit tired by then, and we're thinking, she's 90-something, she's going to say something like world peace or something. She stood up and she said, well, what makes life worth living at Arcare is, and we all went, yes. And she said, that second glass of wine the carer gives me that I'm not allowed to have. Anyway, just quietly, I'm thinking to myself, wine is our fourth value, yes! That works for me and for a few other of my colleagues, but they decided not to use wine. What they did use is the word flexibility, and that came to mean more to us down the track than we actually, and that story actually meant more down the track than it did on the day. We all had a laugh, and it kind of snapped us out of our seriousness, and that was all lovely. But there's actually more to that story, because if you can imagine, Joan had lived with us for 2 years, and it was at one of our homes that was pretty cool, that we had drum groups and everything, and out of everything she could have mentioned, everything she could have said, this is the cool stuff, she mentioned that second glass of wine. And obviously that meant some staff member had gone up and gone, hey, get this into you. And we had to take that seriously. As leaders, as people who were thinking, oh no, what about the risks? We actually had to think, wait a minute, this is what means most to Joan. So I will come back to that later. But really what we ended up with was a focus on relationships between everybody. Whoever entered the space and wherever we went, third-party people, this is about people and about what happens between people. And that's why we didn't use the term person-centred care. It wasn't all about the resident. That didn't seem to match any of that people's stories, not even the residents' stories. Their stories were about their relationships with each other and with the staff and family members and friends who lived, worked and visited under the building. So we really there wanted to focus on the quality of those relationships. And when we came up with all that together, we held big values roadshows. We presented back to staff what they'd presented to us, the values, our focus on relationships, and we gave them a lanyard saying that whatever position you take within Arcare, your first gig is absolutely to focus on the relationships first, because that's where we know all of the really good stuff happens. And I guess they're the two operational supports that I would say straight away. You and your team, I mean the whole team, people who live there, work there and visit, come up with some shared values and agree on that together. Forget what you've already got. These things are always a work in progress. Just at least commit to that and find out what matters to people. It was in this, I think, this permission that is one of the most important elements of operational culture change, and that is giving staff permission to move beyond that professional distance they've been trained to maintain and bring their humanness to work with them and all of the skills and intuitions that brings with it, you know. Do you work in long-term care?
Yes, dementia care.
And do you have, I bet you have friends and family who think you're amazing.
I hope so.
Yep. And I'll bet they think your organisation is super lucky to have you. Yeah, and your organisation everybody's organisation is so lucky to have you in this room and on the internet working with them. The key is for you to bring that amazing person that you are at home with your friends, family, bring that to work with you, not leave that at the front door. My gosh, that amazing version of you, your company couldn't afford if they tried, they couldn't afford that wage. And that leads me to think about the staff member who said to Joan, hey, get this into you. She broke the rules. Oh no. But what does that mean to us that it was the thing that our resident remembered the most? We really had to think, I went to meet this staff member and I think she thought she was in trouble. What have I done? Are you the person who gave Joan the second glass of wine? Yeah. excellent, good work. And she's like, okay, now I'm really confused. But of course, she was in her 40s, she'd had kids, she'd brought them up into the world, she'd had kids' parties with up to 20 kids there, and she'd managed that without killing anybody. She'd had a mother-in-law that she hadn't killed yet, so she knew how to resolve conflicts. This is a woman who had a mortgage, she'd had another career, she entered aged care to sort of after bringing up the kids. This is a woman who was like, she's got it covered, okay? Yeah. Why would we get her to leave that amazingness, all those intuition skills, life skills at the front door? So she'd made a pretty quick decision. She knew Joan really well. She had a relationship with Joan. She knew a bit of Joan's story. Joan was one of those women who, I don't know if you had them here, in the 70s, women used to wear those caftans with the low plunging neck, and that's kind of what they had their drinks on the balcony with. Yeah, Joan was still wearing that kind of gear in her wheelchair. So it was pretty apparent sort of who Joan was. So the staff member was savvy. She would have known that. She would have known the risks. She would have known how much it meant to Joan. And in a really cool decision, gone, here you go. Somehow in our system, we needed to allow for that and say, guess what? That's a good decision. And we trust you to make it. We absolutely do. Because the people who work for us, underestimating the staff who work closest to the residents, underestimating them is a huge mistake, and they feel it. And that's when they bring that version of themselves that's just the tasks, that's not all of that wonderful humanness that staff member brought with them. So this permission is big, and it's deep. It's absolute permission to bring all of those skills and abilities and love and humanness to work with you. That's when you get good stuff like that happening. That's the key enabler. And even since I've been working with a fantastic group called Capital Care in Edmonton all last week, and then with Care West this week in Calgary, and with Sunnyside here in, where am I? Waterloo. So I've worked all up with almost 400 staff in Canada, and I've worked with a lot in Australia, and often when I say bring that permission to bring your humanness and forget about professional distance, I get a lot of people saying, but what about boundaries? What if staff cross the line? Yeah. Really, like, we've been doing this for years now, giving staff permission, and the sky hasn't fallen. But I was super interested in asking, well, what is the worst that could happen in that situation? Especially under our roof. This is happening in long-term care. In community care, maybe you have to think a little bit more and be a bit more careful. But this is under the roof of our support anyway. What is the worst that can happen? And the worst that someone said to me was, well, what if staff say something that upsets, they tell something to a resident that upsets them? I'm like, I don't know where to look, because it's like, can you imagine anything more paternalistic? Yeah, do you really want to sanitise relationships to that level? If I have a relationship with a resident and something bad happens to me, and I've got of course I'm going to share it. Yeah? And they might get upset, because that's what happens when humans love each other. Why on earth would we feel that we could say everything has to be happy for residents? That's a pretty kind of scary place. And it's that paternalism that comes with that institutional way of thinking about our elders. That really paternalistic, this is for their own good, rather than this is a human being who's lived on the planet, brought up kids, and has every right to experience a bit of grief and sadness in the context of a loving relationship as anybody else. So that is where we started, that permission, coming up with shared values, the permission, and we didn't have all the plans yet, but we knew we were onto something by focusing on those relationships and giving staff permission to build them and to bring that to work with them. And so we did have a couple of researchers from America, Kathy Greenblatt and Sue Borson, come to one of our homes just to do a bit of research, filming and photographing. This is about 2 minutes from a larger movie, but I think it shows in pictures what we were doing and where we were getting to with the focus on those relationships.
In the spring of 2013, I had the pleasure of coming to Australia twice, thanks to Alzheimer's Australia, which was hosting an exhibit of my photographs of high-quality Alzheimer's care in 7 countries. During that time, I met with many people, one of whom was a woman named Daniella Greenwood, who was working with a corporation named Arcare to change the culture of care from one in which they were already extremely successful, but to one in which relationships came really to the forefront. Changes that have been recommended for many years but have not been implemented in very many places. I asked if I could have the opportunity to visit one of those places, and I was allowed to come to Helensvale this year when I came back again to photograph for 5 days, and it met all my expectations and more.
We believe that developing open and respectful relationships between families, staff and residents is the most important thing we do.
So the environment in residential care really has two parts. The first part is the physical environment. Well, the physical environment for Helensvale was already perfect, as far as I could see. So the second part of the environment that's so crucial in residential senior care is the human environment, and that's where the redesign began to take place. Through visionary leadership at the top corporate levels, new ideas were introduced about the crucial nature of relationship between staff and resident. The understanding that without cultivation of a close and caring relationship that was as rewarding for staff as it was for residents, there would be no high quality care.
And we get to know them more privately, don't we? So yes, we do. Not just on a kitchen hand person with a resi, it's getting down personally with them.
This culture feels completely personal and personalizable.
The thing that was most impressive to me was that this was a change that was being effected throughout the company. That's unusual. It's a hard enough job to make a change in one place, but to take a new philosophy, implement it across the entire company is really something I think quite extraordinary.
We had people, look, I know that people think that bring in the babies, the oldies love it, you know, but we had an animal farm visiting on the same day, and there was a baby. You know how staff bring their babies in, and like I think everybody is going to love them, and they do. That's great. But I had so many people going, "Yeah, the baby's great. Get it away. I want to hold the goat." We've done that, okay. Let's not overcook it. So what we're really talking about here is a direction, and exactly as was said before, a personal direction, an organisational direction, and even a broader societal direction that people are heading in, whether they recognise it or not. They are heading in a direction. And this is the one that we're all sort of tainted with, because this is where we all came from. This overflow from the hospital system that was the nursing home system. And this was a hospital. So this is where people came, and as soon as they came in, we were focusing on their diagnosis, their illness. Staff were told to keep that real professional distance, which made heaps of sense in the acute sector, because in that context, you know, these relationships are maybe 1 day, 2 day, 3 day relationships. In this under this roof, they're 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, more. So telling staff to have professional distance from that old model is kind of like saying to people, for about 3 years you're going to be surrounded by scary robot people who just go, "Hi, how are you?" It's like you begin to think, what's going on? This is like the one-way relationship where everyone knows everything about you. They know when you migrated here, what your diagnosis is, your life history, when you last opened your bowels, and you know nothing about them. So yeah. These are the things that don't fit in. But as was mentioned before, please don't think that a move away from the nursing home or the medical model has anything to do with a reduction in focus on brilliant, world-class clinical care. That needs to be absolutely excellent, and organisations need to be investing in nurses, investing in the next layer of nurse practitioners. This needs to be excellent. So in no way does this mean it. We're just saying that's great, that's one part of people's lives. Now let's talk about the rest. So we're talking about that lens covering everything. And in this old medical nursing home approach, it was very much about custodial. So again, telling people what's good for them. I know what's good for you, and people feeling quite confident about that. Really great, lovely people feeling okay about bossing people around for their own good. And outcomes and quality and success are determined by treatment outcomes, medical outcomes, indicators that tell us this is a good job because of this medical outcome. And this is where in this space, one of my favourite conversations is around therapies. Everything in this model has to be a therapy. It has to be, because whatever it is has to prove it's having a medical therapeutic outcome. So there's music therapy, art therapy, horticultural therapy, intergenerational therapy. How old and vulnerable do you need to be before hanging out with your grandkids becomes intergenerational therapy? But if you notice, everything calls itself a therapy. I did go to a conference a few years back for Alzheimer's Australia, and there was a wonderful presentation from our local library talking about a short story program coming into aged care, reading short stories, so people didn't require memory between sessions, and even going through the story and at regular points reiterating who the characters were. It was a really wonderful program, and I thought, gee, that's really clever. And then when it got to the last slide, guess what they called it? Bibliotherapy. It's like, what? It gets really ridiculous, but I guess when success is determined by therapeutic outcomes, that's the kind of thing we get. That's where even rec therapists, don't worry, in Australia it's diversional therapists, but rec therapists focus on, okay, so let's say there's a guy called Paul. A week ago he lived out in the community and he used to play bowls once a week. He kind of did that because he liked to get away from his wife Lou, and he liked to have a couple of drinks, and he was a bit competitive. Something happens now this week, he's moved in here, and someone says, right, what are your interests, what are your hobbies, what do you like to do? Great, bowling, and then someone writes a goal. Paul will play bowls to improve dexterity. What? Do you know what I mean? This is how we can really limit people's freedom by making everything about their physical, biological health. That's when food is only always about nutrition. And I just saw somewhere recently that said, we're not doing fried food anymore because it's not good for them. Oh yeah, right. Tell that to me. But this is the type of thinking and people feel okay about it because it's all for someone else's good and it's me making those decisions. Hands up, and you've got to be honest. And anyone online I can see, kidding. If there's a microwave in the room, we can all see. Sorry, I wasn't going to say anything like that. So hands up, anyone in the room who has exercised at least 3 times vigorously, so got your heart rate up at least 3 times in the last 7 days. Hands up. 1. So about 7? Fantastic. What about the rest of you? You're in health, you understand you'll live longer and you'll feel better and you'll be healthier. Why didn't you do it? Now imagine you move into a home and someone says, right, they've just moved in. Let's put them in the exercise morning program. You don't even do that now. It's like, this is the way we think about people. We think about, and success is about biology. It's only about people's health. It's that complete focus. And again, it's for people's own good. I know a friend of mine is a nurse who works for the company I work with, but because we're online, I can't say her name this time. Whatever you do, don't say her name. Let's call her Lisa. Oh, no. So she's a nurse, and I've known her for years that I've been working at Arcare, and she definitely has issues with food and her weight. She's at a weight that I believe is really, really unhealthy and almost having trouble walking at the moment. I do happen to know that almost every day she leaves work, she stops at Kentucky Fried Chicken, buys a large chips, eats it on the way home, ditches the packet to get rid of the evidence so her husband doesn't know. So she can say, I don't know why I'm putting on weight. Do I think that's a great life decision? No, I don't. Do I respect her right to make that choice? Absolutely I do. The thing is, I have seen this woman who you would think would have the kind of empathy that you would have for a weakness like that in others. You would really have empathy for it. But I've heard her say to someone in their 90s, you're popping on that weight, we're going to have to watch those chockies in your top drawer. I'm not joking. And this is a fantastic woman who obviously has that weakness herself, who should have that empathy, but under this model she feels that she has that custodial right to speak to an elder like that and to boss them around. If I'm in my 90s and someone says I can't have a piece of chocolate, you'd better put me on a behaviour chart because I'll be really grumpy. And we do need to be careful because it's under this model that person-centred care can still live. So we get all of these really individualised care plans, and by the way, I can tell you with great authority, staff don't read them. And if we can't admit that between us now, you know, no one comes to work, I can tell you, not one personal carer comes to work and goes, I'll be out on the floor in a minute, I'm just going to read 8 care plans. Here's a list of things you won't see in the real world. And whatever that means, that is the real world. What staff know about a resident, they know because they spend time with them, and they get to know that through the relationship more than anything. But person-centred care really does require that you do create care plans and people do read them, because you're creating really individualised, very individualised, all about you, all about the resident, everything's matched to you. I just have to know what it is, so I need to know all about you. So we can do very individualised work with people, but if it's still focused in this direction, it's kind of just like bossing people around in a really individualised way. And that's what it can be limited to. So, yeah. I guess the difference between person-centred and relationship-centred or relational is person-centred is I know all about you. Relationship or relational is I just know you. And it's a subtle difference, but it's a really big one. So that's what we all inherited. That's where we're heading. This is where we want to be. This is turning the rudder and gradually trying to head in this direction. And believe me, my organisation have been trying this for 5 years now, and we're still turning and learning new things every day, and failing and then learning new things. But it really is, if you can forget all the fancy words and the models and the frameworks and just think of it as one's a nursing home and the other one's senior living. In this way, we are just helping our elders to continue live their life, because they actually need our support to keep doing that. They're probably not safe at home, they need that extra support to keep living their life and to keep making choices. And I think that's a helpful difference because it bypasses all of the terminology and words, and that was a lovely way you described it before. But it's really the focus is on the quality of the relationships between people. And it's not rocket science. The more I know this resident, the more consistently I work with them, the better relationship I have, the better I'm going to be able to support them on all sorts of levels. Even to know about small changes in their health, even to know what their face looks like when they're in pain, to know the little things about that person through a relationship. And these have to be two-way relationships. Staff have to have permission to bring that humanness to work with them. And the outcomes or success are determined by the residents themselves, not by other people or not by a focus just on biology. So if we're finding out if somebody likes food, it's not, are you having enough good nutritious food here that you like? Because what if people don't like nutritious food? Yeah, for me in this context right now, I'm thinking some access to some good quality red wine, a really good internet access, some nice cheeses. At the moment, that'd be good for me. Yep. That's for me. Obviously, it's not going to be for everyone, although it is a few people I know at this table, thankfully. But it's determined by the resident themselves. It's like when we used to think the more activities they do, the better. But what if someone doesn't like leaving their room that often or doing much stuff? Again, we're putting values on things that we think are good for people rather than having them determine it themselves. And I guess for those who heard me speak last year, our learning as an organisation, Arcare, in the last 12 months has been very much in this space. Very much around the rights of people living in our homes, the right to determine what a good life in there looks like to them. And also very much about using these relationships as just another protective layer to make sure that people are making their choices and other people aren't bossing them around. Not us, but also not the people closest to them. we often find that people's rights can be infringed mostly by well-meaning people, but people who are sort of saying, I want mum up at 7 or I want her doing lots of activities. We've really had to get in there to protect residents and to make sure that their privacy is protected. The one thing I'll say is that as a third party fly in, fly out of Canada, and it's something that I've noticed since I've been here that I find a little concerning, and that is there's a real focus in the legislation and in your visits from government agencies around, is family involved in all of the case conferences? Were they asked about this? Have you told family about this? And no one asked, did the resident want you telling them? Or at the very least, was the resident in the room too? So I'm thinking all of these assessments, all of these case conferences, all of these care plan reviews are done without the resident in the room. Yeah, but imagine not even asking, is it okay if I speak to your daughter about? So there's a real, maybe a misunderstanding about what guardianship is and what it isn't, what the limits of power of attorney and the rights of the people who move in here to continue to be citizens with rights to privacy, including rights to privacy to medical and personal information. I tell you what, I wouldn't want to be dobbed onto my kids and to have them boss me around. What about you? So, okay. Well, then you guys know exactly what I mean. Thank heavens there's a good example in the audience. But I would just say that, and a lot of talk about that people have to have 2 baths a week. It's almost like whether they want it or not. And the way around that is just to keep asking the resident to come back later. I've got to tell you, if I say I don't want a bath and you come to me 3 times and approach me later, I'm going to be like, what's wrong with you? I don't want a bath. So again, we're making choices for people and perhaps leaving them out of things that they definitely shouldn't be left out of. And I think that's something that could be worked on here. It's just something I've noticed that I think is potentially problematic. So that's what we've worked on at Arcare together. And again, some of and that's what culture change is. Believe me, we're not there. We've got 30 homes now. It's like having 30 children. Some of them are here, some of them are here, some of them are like never. We've lost managers, we've lost team members. And the main reason we've lost them is that permission thing. It sounds so small. Giving people permission to bring humanness and forget about professional distance. People find it really difficult. And that's been surprising. But as soon as we had this in place and we were saying to staff, you have permission, we really want you to bring your love and the best of you to work, the first operational initiative we looked at was our staffing model. And there's only 2, make no mistake, it's either rotating or permanent assignment. If you're rotating every 2 months, you're still rotating. Permanent assignment is staff at our organisation. We discovered that we had people working as little as 2 shifts, like a fortnight. There's no way you're going to know a resident well, and we're training you, doing your competencies, and then you're coming in so infrequently. There's no way you're going to have that understanding and knowledge, and you'll probably stress other staff out. Like it's basically having an agency staff member. So we said you have to work 3 shifts a week. And you have to work, our catering, environmental and care staff work in the same neighbourhood. And our clinical staff definitely work there. And the care staff work with exactly the same small group of residents. And it's not just working as a team in the same place. It's not like we've got a consistent team in this neighbourhood. If you want the magic from this, you need this kind of consistency, and it needs to be exact. Also, we went to a 1-week roster. So we went away from the hospital 2-week, although I've heard here you have up to a 5-week, to the 1-week roster, just like hospitality or retail. You work Wednesday, you work Wednesday. That's kind of it. But this is our dedicated, a template for a unit in the AM. So if you take a look at this, this is a very, very high care unit, so the ratio is pretty good for us there. So don't be terrified by that. Dedicated staff assignment has nothing to do with ratios. So let's look at Harmeet and Kauai. They work in Section 1. We've split Section 1 into 1A and 1B. Yep. So Harmeet and Kauai would work together. Basically, if I'm in room 1, I only have 2 people ever that are going to be waking me up in the morning, and I know what days they're coming. And it's exactly the same with the PM. So I can build relationships with them, I can know who's going to be knocking on the door. Please never forget the depth of the personal work we do with people. We may be used to it, but to have someone take your clothes off and do that intimate work with you is never underestimate what it means to people. So Harmeet and Kauai would work together. I would say everyone in that neighbourhood would be a 2 by assist, definitely. So they would be working together through, say, those 12, 14 residents, but at the end of the day, if I'm Harmeet, 6 of them are mine. I do the documentation for those. Training would be based around if someone moved into 1A, say room 3, and they had Lewy body dementia, we would send everyone on that line to be really well trained in that area, not blanket train all these staff. Now with this kind of accountability comes real freedom. Because Harmeet's duties list is going to look like the preferences of the residents. So between 7 and 8 she may be doing nothing, but that's because all of her residents want to sleep in. Only 3 of them want breakfast heated up later. Another couple of them are just like, no, I'll have a bigger morning tea. Whatever the preferences of her residents are, that's what her day looks like. So you lose these big institutional horrific things like, okay, today's shower day, your choice, you have one today or you don't get another one till next week. Like really, how individualised is it if it's like, hi, it's your shower day today, you've got another one in 3 days. You don't have to have one, I'll come back later and check. 3 times. But you do need this accountability to have that kind of freedom. Because what we'd love to say to everyone is, please, people can sleep in as long as they like. They can go to bed whenever they like. They can not have a shower. They can miss breakfast. No one ever died from not having a shower or missing breakfast. But the danger, of course, is, in the worst of human nature, that you'd get staff going, well, none of my residents wanted to get up or have food or have a shower or have anything today. If it was on a rotating roster, there would, of course, be that danger. But with this kind of accountability, those patterns stick out really, really strongly. So I would say this is a must-do if you're thinking of moving to a model where you want more freedom, more flexibility. You need the accountability with that kind of freedom. And please, if you've got any questions, don't tell me them now. We'll talk about them later, but do record your questions and I'll answer any. We can come back to this template if you like. But what I have done, and I've never showed this publicly, this is an 8-minute film that's really badly filmed because I filmed it and edited. But when we had our site that we trialled dedicated staff assignment in, I'd go in and sort with my video camera and record at different segments throughout that 12 months. So here it is, about to win some kind of Academy Award.
And this is the 6th week of our dedicated staffing assignment, and it has been absolutely amazing. We've seen the changes from the first week, from the first day even. Staff have been told and encouraged to notice, and behind me on these boards are everything that we have noticed. We're looking forward to writing it down because it's just so exciting. Don't tell management, but staff have a lot more time with the residents. I've been able to take photos of staff spending more time with the residents, just sitting there, relaxed, happy, laughing. It's been fantastic. It's such a lovely thing to see.
He looks great today, shaved and wonderful. Nice to come over and see him like this, instead of being untidy. I used to go home feeling very, very miserable, but now I can go home today and feel just wonderful. It just feels as if I was looking after him. You love me?
Yeah.
I thought you might.
Sometimes I'm going upstairs or downstairs before, so I'm entering the room, knocking, may come in, saying, who are you? Now just knock the door and hello, and they say, oh, good day, how are you? That's a big difference for me as well. This is my 4th year with Arcare, but the first 3 years I was casual, So now I'm committed to be permanent.
I did have concerns about it. I've been in the industry for 20 years now, and my biggest concern was that staff would get very jaded with looking after the same people day in, day out. In the past, what we've always done is quite the opposite and given everybody the opportunity to look after different residents, but the feedback has been completely the opposite.
You can see their smile on their face, like they know, oh yeah, we are here. Like Irene would just give that smile in the morning that, you know, like you can't buy that smile, I would say, you know, she's so happy. And with the staff, like you know who you're working with and you know what you did yesterday, so you can, you know, like compromise with each other, you know. They just take so much more pride in how the residents are presented, how their rooms are presented, so much more pride in their work and so much more integrity in their work.
5 months down the track, I think it's been wonderful that I've always had the same staff look after him, because I think it's made a great difference to me. I'm not so sing when I leave here, because now I know he's in great hands with the same staff.
5 months ago, I had a different smile than what I've got today. My smile's bigger and I'm happy. I can't be any more happier than what I am at the moment. I can sleep in if I have to. I know the people will do the job because, you know, I've got a good relationship with them.
When we involve Basics team and APAT, we're able to bring those staff in, and those staff are the ones who do all the talking, more than the unit managers. If I sit in on those meetings, I'm just so impressed at the little things that they know and the details.
In my observations of dedicated staffing, which I've observed over the last 12 months, I think there's definitely been patient management improvement. Particularly I find when I do a round with the staff, I'm able to gather a lot more information from the PCAs who are actually seeing the patients on a much more frequent and consistent basis. Often the unit managers may not necessarily be quite as informed, and in fact when we're treating and managing behavioural problems, it's the PCAs who are really experiencing these changes. So I'm all in favour of, I've forgotten the actual term you might use, but dedicated staff.
After dedicated staff that has been going for 12 months, it's a very good experience for the staff. So I'm getting to know more about the residents a little bit much more. They know us too, and that's like the most important thing, us knowing them and them knowing us. And they become more confident with us, and they are when they are more comfortable with us, they are more very talkative and very chatty, and they like doing stuff with us because they know us around. And there's one of the residents, like she called me the Sri Lankan lady, so that's very nice because no one else will like recognize, because my name is like really long, and then he knows me like, oh, you're the Sri Lankan lady. So it's very nice to know that some of the residents knows us, like we know them very well.
My name is Amande, and I am working here as a registered nurse, and I usually do the afternoon shifts. And with the dedicated staff, I realized it's like really good, because residents, they get very recognized with the same faces, and they let them do all the personal hygiene, and they're very happy with the same staff. So I think so it's like really good.
12 months on for dedicated staffing in Casuarina. What we find is we involve the dedicated staffing in the case conferences now, and it's just amazing. They can answer a lot of the family questions that we can't often answer at that level, and the family have already built up a rapport with that dedicated staffing person. And the other thing is when things aren't quite right that we identify with a resident, it's much easier to go to that to pinpoint who the staff are, and to you've only got about 4 or 5 staff that you need to speak to about that, so it's really good for that as well.
Well, Mum passed away a couple of weeks ago, and you could see the love and the care from the staff. They knew her, they were talking to her about things that they knew mattered to Mum. That dedicated staff over the last few weeks with Mum and me made all the difference. It was a real close community. It felt like something of days of old, where you would have community and family and people around you that really cared for me, being the son, but also for Mum. And it made the whole passing experience so special, and such an achievement for Mum, an achievement for Arcare, and it was a blessing to be a part of it.
Again, some guerrilla filming from the staff and families involved in our 12-month test of that. But it really does work, and it is a big effort to get happening. And you need to really build a lot of processes and support for staff around implementing, but it is so worth it. It really, really is worth it. We've rolled it out in all of our homes. As I said, we've got 30 now. We've got a certification process. A sticker goes on the door and something on the website to let people know we've got this here and it's good, just so we make sure we do what we say we're doing across the board. So that was the first half of the presentation today. The next is really, really about you and me and anyone who works one-on-one with people who are living in long-term care. And I think your business, whatever organisation you work for, whether it's for-profit or not-for-profit, your business are the residents, your customers, your clients. And whoever has most interaction with those, most touch points, is your business. In Australia, that would be our personal care workers. You would maybe call them care partners here. Would that be right? Personal support workers, so it's not that dissimilar. These are the people who spend most time with the resident. We can talk about culture change. We can have an organisation that's got really lovely values and a glossy magazine and beautiful buildings and fantastic leadership program, and everybody's heading in this great, but where the rubber meets the road is when there's a human being interacting with a resident in the real world. This is where culture change lives or dies, in those interactions. This is the space where it lives. And that's where all of us have an individual and personal responsibility to make sure we own that part of it. I often hear grown women who've got their own families, saying things like, and it always surprises me, saying things like, oh, we can't do that, I'm not allowed, I'll get in trouble. I'm like, what are you, 9? You know, these are grown women who are in a space and find themselves supporting someone. You do have a responsibility to make sure that what you bring to that is good stuff. And because we're working with people in a situation where there is a power imbalance, people definitely have a moral and ethical responsibility to think about how they think about older people, because that's a game changer. My mum is really, really sweet. She never swears. She might even be listening now. Mum, I'm going to say something mean now. No, I'm not. She's really sweet. She's the type of person that waves as you drive down the street, even though you're coming back in a few hours, and it's a really long street, but she'll keep waving. I'm like, is she still going? Okay. It's really gorgeous. She went down to our local bakery recently. She came back, she was crying, she swore, and she said this to me, I'm old. I said, Mum, what on earth could have happened at the bakery to make you so upset? And she said it was really, really simple. The woman behind the counter, when she handed my mum the change, just went like this. Here you go, sweetie. It was that simple and that subtle. Here you go, sweetie. My mum was spot on. Because if she had have been a 30-year-old foxy woman in a business suit, there is no way on God's earth someone would have gone, Here you go, sweetie. Yeah, and I bet that woman behind the counter, she would have been her worst nightmare. She would have been heartbroken to know she'd made my mum cry. For sure, that wasn't intentional. But she would have seen this woman coming and probably thought, oh, there's a nice little old lady. Here you go, sweetie. That lack of self-awareness and reflection actually changed the way my mother saw herself. Now, we work with vulnerable people. We have a moral and ethical responsibility to do better than that. Every single one of us, no matter what our role is, to own our interactions. We absolutely have to think about how we think about older people, because it's a game changer. I don't care how much money your organisation spends on expensive training. If you don't get to people's deeper held beliefs and attitudes, you can just throw everything out. It's not going to make a difference. If I think old people are cute, no amount of expensive Montessori person-centred whatever training is going to stop me doing this. Hi, I like old people, they're so cute. Yeah? Nothing's going to stop that. Why would it? I deeply believe that. Do you know what I'm saying? And that's not going to come from a person who isn't well-meaning. But I think we need to agree that most abuse in this space happens from well-meaning people. Hey, you gorgeous thing. So, and look, what I'm saying to this person, there's no way, like, you don't think I dislike you, do you? No way. And I don't. It's just nothing about you I really deeply respect or admire. Really, that would stop me sort of making my way with your body like this, hey? No, you're good, you've got lovely hair too. And that, I see this all the time. I've known residents for years, and we basically do a rugby tackle when we see each other because we know each other and love each other, and it's a shared thing. But I'm talking about if someone was just to move in, say, to this village here. We're all sitting in here and we look through the window and we see them coming in. They've got bags, one of those things that carry like some of their belongings on, and we go, wow, someone's moving in. We don't know them, but we know 3 pieces of information. They're really old, they're a wheelchair user, and they're just about to enter aged care. These are the 3 facts we know. If based on these 3 pieces of information alone, any of you or your staff would feel comfortable walking up and going, hi, welcome to Schlegel. You need to rethink your practice, really, because that's creepy. If you did that outside of the roof of long-term care out in the community, people would either call the police or go, there's that really creepy, inappropriate girl. And we need to think about that, because what I'm showing you, and it's awful, because I'm smiling when I do it, there's nothing she can do either. There's nothing, is there? And you've got lovely hair too, don't you? And what about you? You've had your hair cut since last time I saw you. It looks lovely. And this is so pretty, hey? And, oh, look at this scarf. Have you just had your hair coloured? It looks gorgeous, really gorgeous. Actually, I didn't even think about that. They're a bit dirty. Let me get that for you. Chin up. That's it. How you doing? Yeah? I'm so sorry, everyone. It's really awful, isn't it? I'm sorry. And I felt really awful doing it. But that is what we do to older people, and they feel it. Yeah, how we treat people's things tells them how much we respect them too. I'll see staff and it's fantastic knocking on a resident's door. Excellent, can I come in? Excellent. Then they'll walk in and they'll go, it's a freezing day out there today. Did you know that? Just helping themselves to people's wardrobes and underwear drawers without saying, is it okay if I? And if someone says to you, oh no, don't even ask. Yeah? When you help yourselves to people's things, or your glasses, I'm so sorry. If you wear glasses, you'll know they're kind of a part of your body. To have someone just reach to your face and take them off, it's just humiliating. So I am sorry. And to everyone I touched creepily. But yeah, I think that we can do better that, each and every one of us. The world would change if we just owned that. Your whole tone of voice changes if you think about how you think about older people. You know, I'll be talking to a colleague, I'll still mess up with this. Just talking like this, normal conversation, a resident will come up here and I'll be going, so why am I talking like this? Yeah, and someone spoke about ageism. And yeah, it's in there. And it's in all of us, believe me. We watch movies called Grumpy Old Men. Yeah, really not a flattering presentation of older people out there for us. We're told that old people are going to be a real drain. There's like, we unfortunately live in a culture, Australia and Canada, that really doesn't value age and does judge success by biology, which is pretty depressing, because if you're not at 24 when you're thinking you're fastest, looking your sexiest, running your quickest, it's all downhill from there, hey? So much to look forward to. But it's in there, and I think, is it deep? Yeah, but if you work with older people, you have a responsibility to think about it, because it will affect your tone of voice, the words you use, and also the freedoms you think you can and cannot allow a person. And then it gets scary. So you can make differences in your own behaviour when you interact with a resident. And if you're in a leadership role, you don't wait for policy. Please don't wait for a policy change from the government. Please don't wait for your organisation to say, everybody, we're doing culture change, and for your leadership group to have gone to leadership training. You have the responsibility in your interactions. That's where the world changes. That's where it all happens, no matter what's happening at a higher level. And you know what? You don't have to wait for the Canadian government to say, oh yes, sorry, we made a mistake. Sure, it's important that you speak to relatives, but please ask the citizen if it's okay first. Don't wait for them to say that. I would say there's things you can do now to protect the rights of the people you support. Could be as simple as saying, when someone comes to you to talk about a resident, somebody said, I just want to talk to you about mum. I'd like it to be involved in more things. You can just go, listen, sorry, I'm super uncomfortable having this conversation without your mum in the room. I tell you what, I'll meet you in her room in 5 minutes. And you model that kind of behaviour to families and to loved ones, and staff see you doing it, you'd be surprised how quickly things change. Don't have a conversation about a resident without them in the room. And it's not just words, they're nothing about me without me. Please don't make it not happen. Say, not on my watch, not ever. So thinking about how we think about older people, and whenever you hear the word they or them, hey, let's get them out of their room, it's good for them. As soon as you hear them or they, you can be pretty sure you're dealing with prejudice and stereotypes. You're assigning one characteristic to a whole group of people based on, say, gender, age, religion, sexual identity. In this case, age. Get them out of their room, it's good for them. That's a pretty common one, really. I live in an attic. If you get me out of my room and I don't want to go, I'm going to be pretty grumpy. And to help staff connect with this, just think about, if any of you have come from another country or from a place that speaks a different language, or your parents did, have you ever seen someone you really love and you know is the smartest guy in the room, spoken to like an idiot by someone in a shop just because they can't speak the language? Have you seen that? How humiliating. And you just think, you don't even know this person. My grandfather's so much smarter than you, but they're going, I can't understand you. That's how people speak to people when they can put them in a pigeonhole. So please draw on that, and get your staff to draw on that, because they've experienced it. It's a horrible, horrible feeling, prejudice and stereotypes. So thinking about how you think about older people, and also in this space in particular, thinking about how you think about people living with dementia, because that'll be a game changer. If you think people with dementia are just like children, I don't care how much training you have. There is nothing going to stop you going, hey, how are you, gorgeous? Hey? And clapping, and maybe even putting the kids show on because they love it. Yeah? It's not training these people need, it's self-reflection. And whether you pray or meditate, you need to go away and own the way you think about people living with dementia, and especially thinking about distress. I think, I'm not sure, in Canada, in different provinces, I think responsive behaviour, there used to be challenging behaviour in Australia, behaviour of concern. Have you gone through that kind of mill too here? Yeah, what do you call it when somebody is distressed and they happen to have a dementia diagnosis? Responsive behaviour, and that's much better than some of the other ones, but we've just kind of decided as our organisation just to call it distress, Because the only reason we'd even be interested in seeing if we can help is if the person themselves is distressed or if what they're doing is distressing another person. Otherwise, we just need to mind our own business. These are just citizens, and it doesn't matter if they're doing wacky stuff. If they're not distressed and no one else is distressed, that's fine. That's why if you see someone walking around, please don't call it wandering. We walk all of the time. If they're distressed, of course I'm going to go up and say, are you okay? The problem is, I reckon everyone in this room and the staff we work with have a pretty good hearts, I think. Would you agree? And if we were outside here in the car park and we saw someone walking around going, oh no, I reckon any one of us would say, are you okay? Can I help you in some way? Do you think so? Of course we would. Most people would. But in this space, we find it happening less often. Do you agree? Some people say it's because staff are just used to it, or I disagree with that. Wholeheartedly disagree with that. I think because in this space, we tell staff that if someone has a dementia diagnosis and they're distressed, it's a symptom of dementia. Something we need to manage, distract, just get on top of, but it's to be expected because it's a symptom of dementia. Of course someone's going to be agitated. Of course they're going to be calling out. And of course that is going to result in staff cutting themselves off from their own humanness. The humanness that they'd show in the car park. Yeah? I've got a friend, Anna. I worked for Arcare on the floor for a few years before working in a few other jobs across the home. But I had a friend, Anna. She was in her late 80s when I was working with her. I worked with her for a few years. She's one of those people, lucky enough, she had dementia, but I so very rarely saw her upset. She actually thought, I worked in a 38-bed dementia-specific home, and she really genuinely thought this was her home and that she was letting us all stay there. And often she would say to me, beautiful girl, invite your mother, she's welcome here always. Oh no, don't be shy. So she really was having an enjoyable life, actually. And there was one time only I saw her upset. It was afternoon tea time when we bring out the big platters of fruit and cake. And I saw her in the room and she's sort of going, I said, Anna, what is it? She said, oh, nothing. I said, Anna, what is it? I can see something's wrong. She pointed at all the food. She said, I don't know how we can afford all of this. But she was such a passionate woman. She loved food, and definitely had been madly in love with her husband, passionately in love. I saw a picture that she'd sent him during the war, and on the back she'd handwritten, longing for you, my darling. And you could just see she had all that kind of stuff going on. Really fantastic woman. I learnt a lot from her and had just great fun with her. When I stopped working on the floor, I came back to visit her a few years later, and she'd gone down, progressed to the stage where wasn't using words anymore. And I saw her in the dining room sitting at the table, and she was doing that sort of rocking really, and I'm like, whoa, what's going on for Anna? And my first thought was she may need to use the bathroom, so I checked that out, but she didn't. And I sat with her thinking, this is so unlike Anna. She was just going like this. And I watched her for a minute, and then I thought, wait a minute, the food's in front of her. She's sitting there rocking. I'll bet she no longer knows what a fork is. Either that, or she forgets the sequence of picking fork up, putting it in food, eating it to satisfy hunger. So I grabbed the fork, I put it in her hand over hand, muscle memory, did that a few times, and she started eating the food, and she was not restless anymore. That was what, she was hungry, she could smell the food, but something had happened obviously that however quickly it had happened, that she forgot that step, or she could no longer recognise a fork. Now imagine if I'd said to the nurse, oh, Anna, look, she's so agitated. Have you got some PRN, something? Yeah, and why wouldn't have I? People who think that that kind of agitation is a symptom of dementia, of course that's what you do. Or I could have sat there and distracted her a bit, just tried to get her mind off it a bit. You know, maybe spoken about her son or given her a wave and sort of held her hand, given her some love. What she needed was the food. The symptom of dementia was some kind of damage to the brain, the part of the brain that enabled her to recognise a fork or know the sequence of steps in order to satisfy her hunger. So thinking about how you think about distress, that's your dementia training for staff. Yeah, communication and thinking about how they think about people with dementia. Can you see what a different outcome that would have been if we hadn't have actually thought about what was happening for Anna? It's a game changer. Telling staff these are symptoms of dementia are really problematic. A few years ago, I had a tumour on my vocal cords. Well, basically my voice stopped working. And I thought, well, maybe I've got those nodules that singers get, you know. So I went to an ENT, and he had a look down, and he went, "Nah, you got this big neck," you know. So 3 things happened. The primary symptom there was the actual apparatus wasn't working, so I couldn't speak. I don't mind talking sometimes. So, you know, I couldn't speak, and when I did try and speak, there was pain. So that was probably secondary to that. And then I was also really worried because at that stage I didn't know what it was, and as you can imagine I was really concerned. So I couldn't speak, I was in pain when I tried to speak, and I was a bit worried about my life really. During that time I was definitely more irritable with the people closest to me, without a doubt. No one would say that irritability is a symptom of having a vocal tumour, but that's exactly what we do to people living with dementia. This agitation, this aggression even, this is so far down the symptom ladder it's not funny. I heard some unfortunate things from staff. One staff member said, "I love working in the dementia area even though I get kicked and punched almost every morning." And I'm thinking, don't do the rocking. So I said, "How is it that you get kicked and punched every morning?" "Oh, just, you know, to get them in the shower. Afterward they're really happy for it though." And I'm thinking, you're so lucky you don't work for my company, because I'd be calling the police now. That's what we call a mandatory report. I have to report that. But this is a person who thinks they're doing it for this person's own good, and that they're only kicking and agitated and aggressive because that's a symptom of dementia. So it's actually okay for me to go ahead and take these person's clothes off. This person who's saying don't do this either physically or verbally is abuse, it's rape. If you're taking somebody's clothes off and they're asking you not to, it's rape, and that's what it feels like. But if we're thinking they're only kicking and screaming, they've got dementia, that's what happens. This is the kind of things that good people can be talk themselves into doing. It's really scary. I hear it all the time, more often than I can actually, I'm happy to report. So having the way we think about people is so much of a game changer that I think it's the best training. In the dementia space, Elle, you might even disagree with me here, but I don't think so. If you get people to think about how they think about older people, or think about how they think about people living with dementia, you learn some good communication strategies, there's your training. But it's got to come from individuals. Please tell your team and tell yourselves, don't wait for your company's huge organisation culture change. Don't wait for the leaders in your unit to be better leaders. Manage up. Manage up. Often that works better. If the staff above you aren't ready, be kind to them, be merciful. And I guess that'd be the last thing I would say before we open up for question time. If you look around the room now, we've got all these gorgeous people working in long-term care, and they are gorgeous people. You are gorgeous people. You're just older people waiting to happen if you're lucky enough. Looking at each other, thinking we've got all this love for older people and the vulnerable people we support. We've got to have that for each other too. If we don't have empathy for each other, our colleagues, our other people from other organisations, our own teammates, if we don't have that mercy and empathy, there's no way we're going to have that for the residents we support. We've got to see our own humanness too, our own frailties, our own humanness. Because everyone in this room, make no mistake, everyone's going through a tragedy right now. They're either really, really sad about something from the past, really struggling with something today, or really worried about something in the future. There's something going on for everyone in this room. And if you get to work and someone's having a really bad day, they're not talking, they're walking really loudly. I just did that so you'd notice my new Canadian shoes. They go outside and they're kind of a bit rude, and you know they've had 100 cigarettes at once and they've come back in. I'm just saying have mercy for them. They could have had the worst morning, that might have had a fight with their partner, their children might have been mean to them as only children can. They might have put that card in the machine to get money out for gas and there's nothing there. You know, all of the crap things that can happen to all of us. We're just working with and are being led by other human beings, and they're going to make mistakes. So please have each other's back, because I know that you all need it one day, for someone to have mercy and empathy and have your back too. We're all doing the best we can mostly. Would you agree? So now I've left some time for any questions, comments. Don't throw stuff.
Hi, my name is Tanya Pohl. I'm from McCormick Home in London. I actually spoke at the first culture event here about sort of the legislative piece. So I'm wondering if you could speak to, in Australia, what the legislation is like, because one of the things that I spoke about when I spoke here was that we have this huge resident Bill of Rights, but it doesn't necessarily supersede other parts of the legislation. So as operators and people who work in long-term care, I think it's our due diligence to sort of advocate for those rights, but the ministry hammers us and all the other parts of the legislation. So I just wondered if you could speak to how Australia, what your legislation's like, and as you went through this journey, how do you balance the two?
That's a terrific question. It's only this year that we've really fumbled into this area, and we've only noticed it because staff are really pushing resident rights, and that's when we started to notice, wait a minute, where is this breaking down? And it started to happen with people external to us around, we want to know this information. So we have the Charter of Resident Rights too. The first one, I believe, is you don't need to go past it. It says when you move in here, you still have your same civil, legal, consumer rights, human rights. That's all, I kind of think that's kind of the only one we need. But nothing conflicts with the legislation. The legislation is particularly our standards. I think we're over compliant and we often misunderstand our own standards. There's a privacy clause there that anybody who moves in has a right to privacy, and we have to prove to the government how we're maintaining this person's privacy. Now, up until now, we've chosen that to mean, of course, we're going to close the door when the person's getting dressed. We haven't thought of it as in privacy of actual medical information and how I'm spending my time. Do you know what I mean? So we looked at, we actually have a one-page that we give to families now to let them know what power of attorney is and isn't, for instance. It doesn't automatically kick in when someone moves in, and it doesn't automatically afford someone the right to know information or to make all decisions. Certainly doesn't give people the right to make decisions about what time another human gets up or goes to bed and what they eat. So the legislation, I believe, is supporting us. Mind you, our quality agency have really progressed this year, and they are making all of our homes when they visit, they say, great, can we see the assessments? Was the resident present? And how did you change your case conference to make sure it was in a venue to maximise their ability to feedback, or it was at a time of day? So I'm loving that. Our managers are going, oh gee, they're really strict on that, and I'm going, yes. That they really are pushing the resident involvement and resident rights, I think. I think there's the stuff that's really messy around hygiene and food safety and outings, but I still believe that we're too compliant and then we don't push back enough. I don't know if that answered it though. But we definitely don't have the push for families to know everything unless the resident wants them to, and that is a concern in Canada, I think, a big concern.
Right, thank you. We got a couple questions or comments from people online. I'll hand it over to Chelsea to address those.
Okay, so from Candace, she says, sometimes families believe that they determine quality outcomes for our neighbors. What strategy do you recommend for supporting them to embrace that our neighbors make their own decisions?
Yeah, that's the messy area we find ourselves. So on the one hand, you need to manage what we're doing now, and we haven't done it up till now, so we're still dealing with the times we haven't done it, but you need to manage expectations from day one. And to say this is how we do things here. We will absolutely be vigilant in protecting. Our duty of care is not just for the health and safety of a person, but it is also to maintain their citizenship rights. And we ask families help us to do this. And then I would say, once you get that out of the way to begin with, and don't set up false expectations, then offer education sessions for families and try and support them in other ways. But I'll let you know. We're in the middle of it.
Fantastic. Okay, another question here from Jenny. If we're doing dedicating staffing, then what happens when our home is short?
Short-staffed. So that means they wouldn't be backfilling a shift? I guess it's all hands on deck with the people who know the people whose dedicated carer isn't there. But if it's sick leave or annual leave, there's some really great processes around that to manage that, to get the same person in.
Sort of with that, do you, with your staffing model, when somebody is on vacation, is their partner automatically expected to work for them, or how do you manage? Can they both be off?
Yeah, no two people in the same section, the same role, the same shift can have annual leave approved at the same time. So there'll always be one of the partners there, and when we backfill the shift, we backfill it with one consistent person. We learnt that the hard way.
All right. Thanks, Danielle. It was a great talk. And
thank you.
I feel like I know you better now.
Sorry about the lovely hair.
And Sherry can probably, well, she can speak to it much better than I can, but in thinking about your comments about training and starting with individuals and having the culture change happening at that individual level. In some of the work that we've been doing, some educational work and so on, we've had experiences where staff have tried to change. They've tried to be more relational, for example, but those around them may look on that in a negative way. And so sometimes it's almost like setting staff up to potentially to fail. So they're trying, and they're trying to do things differently, but maybe those around them aren't as open yet.
Sure, I would wonder what that meant. I guess when I'm talking about the bedroom door is closed and it's just you and I, your company isn't there, your staff and your colleagues aren't there, it's just you and I. How this interaction happens, I own. And that's much more what I'm talking about. I think when we say relational, I find staff get confused with that, so even respectful. If I own those interactions, maybe I can't. And also letting staff know, and this is a big thing, and it didn't dawn on me for ages, when you use that relational stuff, they think, I'll hurry with the task so I can have that relational cup of coffee with someone. That's not going to exist. I don't know about you guys, but we've had big cuts in Australia, and we're not going to be saying, let's have more staff anytime soon. So letting staff know that that interaction, that task is the relationship. That was a big breakthrough. Can you imagine anything more personal and relational than helping someone choose what to wear, washing their beautiful body, helping them put their makeup on? That's when the relationship happens, not when there's this elusive 10 minutes to have a great activity or a cup of coffee. So if there's staff trying to do the other things, other staff might get a bit annoyed by like, what are you doing? Why aren't you doing a task or helping us with our people? But I was focusing much more on the you and I space and my ownership of that and the respect I bring to it. But I know from working with staff recently that leaders can really get in the way, and they can actually instruct to behave in ways that are the opposite to this. And that's the thing I'd be looking at in my company, to get consistency across, especially leadership at the neighbourhood level. That's where it all happens, not at the big top or anything. So that they don't need to know anything. Just keep out of people's way. To stop, give them permission, support them, and just don't go against what we're saying. That's it. And if people do, they probably don't belong with your company anymore because you've told them not to get in the way of people building relationships and giving people the freedom to sleep in. And if they still go against that, I'd probably be setting some miserable people free.
Those are great ideas, thanks. Anybody else have questions? Josie.
I really thank you, Daniella. That was fabulous. I was really taken by your description about each of us has to think about how we think about older people ourselves. And I wonder if, I think most of us, may carry stereotypes and prejudices, but we don't recognize it, realize it, or admit it.
Yep.
Do you know of any tools or, self-assessment or those sorts of things that can help enlighten people about any prejudices or stereotypes that they might hold?
The one thing we do in our sessions now is just have pictures around the wall of older things, and even mysterious things like long paths with no end, but old houses and bikes and cars and trees that are sort of reached that stage. And we say to staff, just before the session starts, can you go around and just leave some comments about how this makes you feel? So it's not perfect, but it's a way in there, because what you'll get is, and there's someone sitting in a kitchen, an older person, it could be pensive, or it actually could just be like, contemplating something. But often it's read as lonely, sad, depressing, once was useful, broken down, abandoned. So even just going around the room and saying, we get it, but these are the kind of themes that are emerging, this is how we all feel. I think people listen to themselves speak to older people. I've had people come up 20 minutes after a session and go, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I just heard my own tone of voice, and I'm going, what was this? Or I said love, or sweetie, or darling, or I'm not here. Yeah, and I didn't realise how many times I use pet names for a grown-up. I don't have any magic tricks there, except being present is important, and not just being absent when you're doing that task and creating that relationship. And Sherry's got some physical exercises that I now use. I stole last time from last time I was in Canada, and I haven't seen anything have a bigger impact with my staff and than that physical exercise about presence. So a bit of that and the pictures helps, but people are pretty good at picking up themselves actually. They sort of go, oh no, I just heard my voice.
Okay, so Bill asks, how do you help someone with an ageist mentality reflect and change their perspective on working with residents?
I think we've all got it in some way.
Right, that's what we were just tapping into.
I see babing moments. I had a babing moment myself through those sessions, and I see staff have it all the time, and I see them get uncomfortable, especially when I do the hey sweetie. So I'm really careful when I do that, especially around staff, direct care staff, to say I'm not making fun of our work or our love in this space. You are gorgeous people with beautiful hearts. I'm just saying this is something you need to own. So I learnt to really, because I see people look uncomfortable, and maybe there is a bit of uncomfortable that people need to feel in order to get to the next spot. But I think even the story about my mum at the bakery, that was a real babing moment for me. That's why I share it, because I initially said, what? She just said, there you go, sweetie. And then it's like, wait a minute, yeah,
That's fantastic. Just one other quick one here. Jenny asked what other strategies have worked to approach someone if they do happen to be striking out, even if you're verbally explaining what you're doing, but they're still uncomfortable, if you have additional strategies for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So if someone is striking out, I would show them physical respect by stepping away and seeing that as a verbal sign of whatever you're doing, I'm not happy with. So I would step back. I'd speak in a low voice, I'd keep it at a monotone, and I would, just like any customer service person would, I'd say, I can see you're upset, I'm really sorry, I'll be back later. It works for families too. That customer service stuff is really good. This person doesn't need to escalate. I would never tell someone what I was doing. I would always be asking for permission anyway, and as soon as they pushed me away, I'd be like, okay, well, I'm not going to abuse you, yeah. And it can get really messy. It can get to the stage where it's 4 days without a shower and people have been fecally incontinent and it's falling out of a trouser leg. This is a real world story. And staff came and said, right, what are you going to do now? You said we can't force them. And I'm like, what it is a huge meeting. It's a huge decision. It's bringing family in. It's thinking, what are we going to do so we don't physically abuse this person? But I would never be in hitting distance, because that's disrespectful to me. But it's saying to this person, I don't see that you're telling me no, so they're going to have to escalate. I get it. I see you. Sorry about that. I'll come back later. I just would stop what I was doing, definitely. Never, ever continue it.
No, thanks. That sounds like a really good strategy. We have time for one more question, a couple more.
Thank you, and thank you for a very inspiring address. The thought that came to me is that the institution who are providing the care, whether it's resident, whether it's retirement or long-term care, there's going to be an onus on the human resources of the people who are hiring the care workers. Now, from your presentation, the care workers are really got to be special people. They have to be committed, they have to be friendly, they have to be gently persuasive, they have to be flexible, and of course work in an operational environment that allows flexibility. They have to measure the personalities of the residents, and you've just given a couple of instances how careful you have to be, especially in the initial approaches to the resident. And for instance, if I was a new resident and you would approach me and put your arm around me and ruffle my hair, I might think, my God, that woman's coming on to me. On the other hand, I might enjoy it very much. But I think also it is imperative that the care worker experience a self-satisfaction and a joy in making residents happy. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I agree wholeheartedly. The HR process is definitely more about, for that role, attitudes and attributes than it is particular skill sets. When we asked our staff what brought them the most joy working in this space, thousands and thousands of them said exactly that. Their relationships with residents means the world to them and making a difference. And a lot of them phrased it as seeing a resident smile. But really that relationship and putting staff in a model where they're given permission to experience that love and not they have to do it secretly, that's definitely reduced burnout, staff burnout for us. So you're spot on with that. Your values have to match the organisation. But the HR level, I think we used to look at how long you've worked in the industry. We used to ask. We no longer ask that. Because it's not about how long you've worked and how many jobs you've had. It's finding out if people have some of those softer skills around connection and respect, the things that are harder to train.
Can you give us some guiding principles kind of when we're dealing with folks who have maybe early onset dementias or slight dementias in their life, and when we deal with the Residents' Bill of Rights and we're dealing with powers of attorneys, just any guiding principles you have with how our team members can deal with that?
It's a messy area. I think there's a few experts that will be talking about experiencing dementia at different ages here today. But for us, it wouldn't just be about the diagnosis. The rights of someone that is living with us would be the right. We would see it as our duty of care to protect that. I believe, and now having talked to our legal team, that we've all had a misunderstanding of what duty of care means, and also what power of attorney means. So I think it's going to be. I don't think your team should have to face it day in and day out. That's why I think it's so important to do from day one, to let people know this is how we do things here, and work with us to protect the rights of this person. In day-to-day action and preference, whether that preference is expressed in words or action, it would all be about every one of our skills would be honed and should be honed at finding out what that particular human being wants or doesn't want. And that's when we call the troops in to say, if I was to ask your mum if she liked this, what would she like? Really using all of our skills to find out not what anyone else thinks is best for them, but let's find out what she actually wants right now. I think it does get stressful for staff in the world to face that every day, and I think they need to be protected from it, and they shouldn't have to speak to it. I would definitely say any staff working directly with residents, don't give any information away. any at all. There'll only be one person in a family who's legally responsible or able to hear that, maybe, and we need to know who that person is, and then the nurse who knows who that person is can then interact with them to give that information if needed. But I think it's a problem, and if I went to my GP and he did a test and said, right, you've got a UTI, here's some Keflex, off you go. And then my partner called up and said, how is she? And then the doctor said, oh, she's fine, she's got a UTI, give her some antibiotics, she'll be all right. I could sue the GP. I could sue them. But we don't think of those same kind of privacy under this roof, and I think all of our staff need to.